and also from the U.S. Department of Commerce, we formed this commission, and I think the reasons were obvious. One is, as we are in the midst of a really very significant technology transition, and I think most of you have followed technology, knows that there is generally a development curve followed by an extremely rapid adoption curve, and we are actually in the middle of one of those adoption curve changes. So as that came about, and we had the opportunity for a very positive move in how we actually improve the efficiency of technologies as it relates to the improvement of our government, and secondarily, a very positive trend to how we can really use technology as a baseline to improve both U.S. Global competitiveness and even extend into the world economy. Our ambitions were extremely ambitious, and I like the word we put, somewhat audacious, and I have had the opportunity to participate in some of these sessions before, and I will tell you, I have never seen one that was able to bring the two factors that are important together. One is deep collaboration among peers, which actually ends up in substance. I've seen us have one, I've seen us have the other, but rarely have I ever seen a commission come up with two. I think one of our reasons why was we set the goal to have very specific practical recommendations to be able to get those on to a very understandable format and to do it quickly. So if you think about some of the undertaking here, over 70 companies, and these are the world-class leaders across the board in technology, more than 300 individual contributors. We started some of our meetings with saying our goal is to put our company interests second and to put the task at hand first. And while we probably said that thousands of times, I have never seen a group work more collaboratively actually do it. Hundreds of meetings over a 3-month period, and again, as you will see, you'll end up with a very practical recommendation. What we're going to go over today is the output of that. You've already heard that it comes in two forms. Again, with our spirit of being very practical, one is a buyer's guide, and the second is a report which tends to some longer range policy and also some short-term recommendations on how we can begin immediately to start to drive efficiency through this evolution to cloud technology. So the buyer's guide is where I'd sort of like to kick off, and then I'm certainly going to turn over to my colleagues to pick up on the specific recommendations. The goal here was to set out for those agencies and those federal government institutions that were looking to jumpstart their way into the evolution, a very practical step-by-step guide. I would encourage you to look at www.cloudbuyersguide.org. That was www.cloudbuyersguide.org. Very tricky sort of common sense approach. And what you'll see is case studies, but a really step-by-step process of how to look at a business case, draw it through requirements, how to educate a staff that's having to change their roles, responsibilities, and technical capabilities, and a framework for decision-making. And so when you break it into its 4 components, it is indeed very practical. And if you think about the players that were involved, these are world-class professionals that have been doing this for a very, very, very long time. It's a series of best practices that are aimed also at a broad group of folks, everywhere from the acquisition managers to program managers to chief financial officers. And it does start to take down and address some of the barriers, which is the actual procurement process itself. And so if you actually take a time to go into that work, it is quite pragmatic. You'll also notice that we have put great effort to make this a living, breathing, extensible document. It will continue to be updated at the website, and the initial proposal is simply the beginning of what we think is going to be continuing dialogue, continuing best practices, and again, supported by the best and brightest. I was amazed as I was talking to a bunch of our colleagues, and normally when you go through a process like this is, you hear some people who thought it was a great experience, some people who thought they maybe quite didn't get their point of view, but I will tell you, across the board, everybody who participated thought it was an extraordinary output, but also a very collaborative effort. And I would be remiss without thanking my colleague and longtime associate Mark Benioff for some really heavy lifting on the buyer's guide, as well as some of the others. So that's the buyer's guide. The second part of the report actually gets into report, which is organized over 4 principles and really addresses both policy and practice. You'll find that the report is broken into sections of trust, transnational data flows, transparency, and transformation, each one addressing the kind of structural things that have to happen, again, transforming through policy all the way into practice. Consideration was given to both the needs of people, process, and technology, all which are fundamental to any one of these. They are quite pragmatic. They actually jump into some of the more difficult and complex issues, but at the end of the day, output themselves into 14 recommendations, each one that we believe can be practically implemented. And again, that is the great indication that you have solid output, is that when it can be taken down into pragmatic policy decisions. With that, I would also add that it was absolutely an honor to be associated with all the colleagues and to get into the specifics of the recommendations. And again, the substance part, I'd like to start turning it over to Jim.
Thanks, Michael.